I'm Megan Taylor, 29 years old, and last month my parents and sister showed up at my door expecting me to hand over $250,000 for a wedding. Not my wedding. My sister's dream wedding at some luxury resort. The same sister who got a fully paid college education while I worked 3 jobs and took out loans. The same parents who told me they just didn't have college money for me, but somehow funded my sister's entire life. The audacity still leaves me breathless. If you've ever dealt with entitled family members who suddenly remember you exist when they need money, hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and if you've experienced something similar. Stick around to find out how I handled this situation and what happened when I finally stood up for myself after years of being the family ATM. To understand why this wedding demand felt like such a slap in the face, you need to know about my family. We were solidly middle class, growing up in a suburban neighborhood outside of Seattle. My parents, Karen and Richard Taylor, both worked steady jobs, dad in insurance sales and mom as an elementary school administrator. We never struggled for necessities, but we weren't wealthy either. From my earliest memories, there was always a clear favorite in our house, my younger sister Brooke. 3 years my junior, Brooke was the baby of the family and could do no wrong. While I don't think my parents intentionally set out to create such an obvious disparity between us, their actions spoke volumes. When Brooke showed interest in dance at age 6, she was immediately enrolled in the most prestigious dance academy in our area. When I asked for piano lessons around the same age, I was told we couldn't afford extracurriculars right now, and maybe next year. Next year never came. Birthday celebrations followed the same pattern. My birthdays typically involved a homemade cake and maybe one friend sleeping over. Brooke's birthdays were elaborate affairs with themes, decorations, and at least 15 screaming kids at venues like the local water park or trampoline center. Brooke's more social, my mother would explain when I asked why my celebrations were always so much smaller. She needs these things more than you do. Christmas brought similar disparities. One year when I was 14 and Brooke was 11, I received a practical set of school supplies and a used scientific calculator for my upcoming advanced math class. Brooke unwrapped a brand new iPhone and designer clothes. When I later mentioned the obvious difference to my father, he patted my shoulder and said, "You're the smart one, Megs. You don't need stuff like that. You're going places on your brains, not your looks." That was their narrative. Brooke was the pretty one who needed to be socially connected, while I was the smart one who should be focused on academics. It was a box they put me in that somehow justified giving me less while expecting more. Despite this, I excelled in school. By senior year, I was valedictorian with a perfect GPA. My dream was to attend Cornell University for their computer science program. I'd been accepted, and it was all I could think about. I'd visited the campus during a school trip to New York and fell in love with everything about it. The ivy-covered buildings, the cutting-edge computer labs, the energy of the place. I could see myself there, thriving, becoming the person I was meant to be. The night of my high school graduation, after the ceremony where I delivered the valedictorian speech to a standing ovation, my parents took Brooke and me out to dinner. I was floating on air, imagining my future at Cornell, when my father cleared his throat. "Megan, we need to talk about college," he began, folding his hands on the table. "We're very proud of your acceptance to Cornell, but we need to be realistic about finances." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Well, honey," my mother jumped in, "college is very expensive these days, and we just don't have the money saved up for something like Cornell." I stared at them, confused. "But we've been talking about Cornell for years." I thought. "I mean, you always said good grades would get me to a good college." "And they have," my father nodded. "You've been accepted. That's the achievement. But the financial part is something you'll need to figure out. With your grades, surely there are scholarships." "I already applied for every scholarship I could find," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I got some. But Cornell will still cost about $30,000 a year after those." My parents exchanged glances. "That's just not possible for us right now," my mother said. "Maybe you should consider State University. It's much more affordable." "What about the college fund?" I asked. We weren't rich, but my parents had decent jobs. Surely they had saved something over the years. Another uncomfortable glance between them. Well, my father began. We had started some college savings, but there were other expenses. Family vacations, home renovations. He trailed off. And Brooke's car, my mother added, as if this were perfectly reasonable. She needed reliable transportation for all her social activities. I looked over at my 16-year-old sister, who was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention to the conversation that was shattering my future. The reliable transportation they referred to as a brand new Honda Civic they had purchased for her just 3 months earlier. So there's nothing? I asked, fighting back tears. Nothing at all saved for my education? You're the smart one, Megan, my father repeated his familiar refrain. We always knew you'd figure it out with scholarships or loans. Brooke will need more help when her time comes. And there it was. The truth I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. My achievements were used against me. Because I was the smart one, I was expected to fend for myself, while Brooke would continue to receive whatever she needed. I went home that night and cried until I had no tears left. Cornell, my dream school, was now just another thing that wasn't meant for me. The summer after graduation was a blur of desperate scholarship applications and financial aid forms. I realized quickly that Cornell was simply out of reach. Even with student loans, the gap was too wide without any parental contribution. After weeks of despair, I accepted the reality and enrolled at State University, which offered me a partial academic scholarship. To make ends meet, I created a punishing schedule. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. for opening shifts at a campus coffee shop, attended classes from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., studied between classes, worked as a server at a local restaurant from 5 p.m. to midnight, then returned to my cramped dorm room to study until I couldn't keep my eyes open. My first semester GPA was 3.7, respectable, but lower than I'd ever received and dangerously close to losing my scholarship, which required maintaining a 3.5. I was constantly exhausted, surviving on coffee and whatever food I could grab from my restaurant job. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes, and I lost weight my already slim frame couldn't afford to lose. Meanwhile, Brooke was having the college experience I'd dreamed of. She'd been accepted to Westlake University, a private school known more for its social scene than academics. Her Instagram was filled with sorority parties, spring break trips, and shopping sprees. My parents covered her full tuition, off-campus apartment, and gave her a generous monthly allowance. College is so stressful, she texted me once. I had to drop my morning class because it was, impossible to get up for an 11 a.m. lecture after Thursday night mixers. I read this message during a 15-minute break between my morning shift and an 8 a.m. calculus class, still wearing my coffee-stained work shirt, and felt something harden inside me. Coming home for holidays became increasingly difficult. The first Thanksgiving break, I noticed how my parents fawned over Brooke's stories about her sorority sisters and parties, while showing only polite interest in my academic achievements. "You're working 2 jobs?" my mother asked when I mentioned my schedule. "Isn't that affecting your grades?" "My GPA is 3.7, I replied. "That's good," she said with a slight frown. "But don't you need higher for your scholarship?" There was no acknowledgement of how hard I was working, just concern that I might lose the financial aid that kept me from asking them for money. Christmas that year was the breaking point. We gathered around the tree for our traditional gift exchange. Brooke received an envelope that contained I excused myself to the bathroom where I silently cried, then returned with a manufactured smile and thanked them for the gifts. That was the last holiday I spent at home. For the remainder of my college years, I made excuses about work schedules and study commitments. Instead, I spent breaks with my roommate Rachel and her family, who welcomed me warmly and never made me feel like an imposition. Rachel became the sister I wished I had. She noticed how I was struggling and often left food on my desk when I returned late from work. Her parents, both professors, understood the value of education and treated me with a respect I'd never felt from my own family. They engaged me in intellectual discussions and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and ambitions. "You're always welcome here, Megan," Rachel's mother told me one Thanksgiving. "We're proud of how hard you're working." Those simple words of affirmation meant more than she could possibly know. By senior year, I had settled into my grueling routine. My GPA had recovered to 3.9, and I'd secured an internship at a local tech company that sometimes let me work remotely, easing my financial burden slightly. I still worked at the coffee shop and restaurant, but had managed to reduce my hours just enough to avoid complete burnout. My graduation ceremony was scheduled on the same weekend as a spa retreat my parents had planned with Brooke. "We booked this months ago," my mother explained over the phone. "And you know how much Brooke has been stressed about her finals. Couldn't you just mail us your graduation photos?" I told them not to worry about it. Rachel's family attended instead, cheering loudly when I crossed the stage. Her father took photos and her mother presented me with a beautiful leather portfolio embossed with my name, a gift more thoughtful than anything I'd received from my own parents in years. That day, surrounded by Rachel's family and a few close friends I'd somehow managed to make despite my work schedule, I realized I had built a life without my biological family support. I had done what my father said I would. I had figured it out. But the cost had been enormous, both financially and emotionally. Graduating during an economic downturn meant job prospects weren't as plentiful as I'd hoped. Despite my excellent grades and internship experience, the competition was fierce. After sending out dozens of applications, I finally landed a position at a small software startup. The pay wasn't great, but the experience was invaluable. I worked alongside talented developers who became my mentors, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. The hours were long, often stretching into nights and weekends, but unlike my college jobs, this work energized me. I was building something, creating value, using my mind in the way I'd always known I could. While my peers from college often spent their earnings on apartments in trendy neighborhoods or regular happy hours, I maintained the frugal habits I developed in school. I shared an apartment with 2 other women to keep rent low, brought lunch from home every day, and continued to live as if I were still a struggling student. The only luxury I allowed myself was therapy, recognizing that the years of family dynamics had left wounds that needed addressing. My therapist helped me understand that my parents' favoritism wasn't my fault and that their treatment of me reflected their issues, not my worth. "You've internalized the idea that you don't deserve nice things," she observed during one session. "That you must earn every comfort through extraordinary effort while others receive them freely. That's not a healthy perspective." Working through these issues was painful but necessary. I began to recognize patterns in my behavior, my reluctance to ask for help, my tendency to overwork, my difficulty accepting compliments or recognition. Slowly, I started to heal. At work, my dedication paid off. After 18 months, I was promoted to senior developer, bringing a significant salary increase. I immediately increased my student loan payments, determined to free myself from that burden as quickly as possible. By my 3rd year in the industry, I had built a reputation as a reliable problem solver who could handle complex challenges. I joined professional organizations, attended conferences when I could afford them, and built a network of contacts that extended far beyond my small company. One of these connections led me to Diane, a senior executive at a major tech corporation who took an interest in my career after we met at an industry event. Unlike mentors who offered technical guidance, Diane provided something I'd been missing: maternal wisdom and support. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me over coffee during one of our monthly meetings. "Smart as hell, but working too hard to prove something. The question is, who are you proving it to?" I had no answer then, but her question lingered in my mind. Was I still trying to prove my worth to parents who had consistently undervalued me? When I turned 27, I reached a milestone I'd dreamed of for years. I put a down payment on my own condo. It wasn't anything extravagant, a 1-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, but it was mine. The day I signed the papers, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I had provided myself with the security my parents never had. I texted them a photo of my new keys with the caption, "Just bought my first place." My mother responded with a thumbs up emoji and my father with "Congrats, kiddo." Brooke didn't respond at all. By then, I had learned not to expect more. My communication with my family had dwindled to occasional text exchanges and obligatory birthday calls. They knew the basics of my life, where I worked, where I lived, but little about my day-to-day existence or inner thoughts. It was easier that way, creating distance to protect myself from the pain of their indifference. After 7 years of diligent work and careful financial planning, an opportunity arose that changed everything. A major tech company, one of the industry leaders, recruited me for a senior position with a 6-figure salary and substantial stock options. It was the kind of offer that validated all my years of struggle and sacrifice. The first person I called was Diane, who had recently retired but remained a steadfast presence in my life. "I knew you'd get there," she said, her voice warm with pride. "The question now is, what will you do with this success?" What I did was continue my careful financial management. I increased my investments, maintained my modest lifestyle, and by my 29th birthday, I had achieved something remarkable: $300,000 in savings and investments. After years of financial insecurity, the feeling of having this safety net was indescribable. My life had reached a place of peace and stability. I had a fulfilling career, a comfortable home, true friends, and enough savings to weather any reasonable storm. I had created the security I'd always craved. Then my family showed up at my door. It was a Sunday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone and considered ignoring it, as I was deep into coding a personal project. But something compelled me to answer. Standing in my hallway were 3 people who felt like strangers despite sharing my blood: my mother, father, and sister Brooke, all wearing tentative smiles. "Surprise," my mother said, arms open for a hug I reluctantly stepped into. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by to see your place." In the area? They lived 3 hours away. No one travels that distance for a casual drop-in. "You should have called first," I said, but stepped aside to let them in. Their eyes scanned my condo with poorly disguised assessment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was well appointed with quality furniture I'd carefully selected. The living room featured a wall of bookshelves filled with technical volumes and literature. My modest home office contained my pride and joy. A high-end computer setup where I did freelance work and personal projects. "This is nice," my father said, in the tone people use when something exceeds their low expectations. "You've done well for yourself, Megs." Brooke wandered around, picking up items and putting them down with minimal interest. She looked different, more polished and expensively dressed than I remembered from our last brief encounter 2 years ago. "Are you hungry?" I asked, falling back on hosting duties to navigate the awkwardness. I could order something. This led to a dinner of delivered Thai food around my small dining table. Conversation remained superficial: weather, traffic, neighborhood amenities. No one mentioned that this was their first visit to my home of 2 years. Halfway through the meal, Brooke suddenly thrust her left hand across the table, revealing a massive diamond ring that caught the light from my dining room pendant. "James proposed," she announced, beaming. "We're getting married next summer." "James?" I asked, realizing how disconnected I was from her life. "James Whitfield," my mother filled in. "Son of Douglas Whitfield from Whitfield Investments. They've been dating for about a year now." The name meant nothing to me, but from their reverent tones, I gathered the Whitfields were wealthy and important. "Congratulations," I offered, genuinely happy for her despite our distant relationship. "That's wonderful news." What followed was an hour of wedding talk. The venue they'd selected was an exclusive resort in the Napa Valley. The guest list numbered over 300. There would be a string quartet, gourmet catering, designer floral arrangements. Brooke had already chosen a dress from a boutique in New York. "It's going to be the most amazing wedding," Brooke gushed, pulling out her phone to show me a Pinterest board labeled "Dream Wedding." "James's family knows everyone who's anyone. There will be state senators there, maybe even a congressman." I nodded and smiled, wondering why they were sharing these details with me. We hadn't been close in years. I doubted I'd even be invited to this extravagant event. After dinner, as I cleared the containers, my father suggested a family meeting in the living room. The formality of the phrase put me on alert. Family meetings in our house had always been one-sided affairs where decisions were announced rather than discussed. So, about the wedding, my father began once we were all seated. There's been a bit of a financial hiccup. My mother nodded solemnly. James's parents were supposed to be covering most of the expenses, being the groom's family and all, but there's been a change of plans. They're being completely unreasonable, Brooke interjected, her voice rising. They said they'd only pay for a reasonable wedding with under 100 guests. Can you believe that? Under 100. That's barely a wedding at all. I remained silent, still not understanding why this concerned me. The thing is, my father continued, we've already put down some non-refundable deposits based on the original understanding with the Whitfields. Substantial deposits, my mother added. And the wedding Brooke deserves, well, it's going to cost more than we can manage on our own, my father finished. The room fell silent as they all looked at me expectantly. Slowly, the purpose of this visit dawned on me. You want me to contribute to the wedding? I asked carefully. We were hoping you could help with some of the expenses, my mother confirmed. We know you're doing well in your career. How much are you talking about? Another exchange of glances before my father cleared his throat. About $250,000. I stared at them, certain I'd misheard. $250,000? For a wedding? It's not just a wedding, Brooke said defensively. It's my special day. And it's an investment in my future. The connections we'll make with James's family and their circle will be invaluable. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice unnaturally calm despite the anger building inside me. You want me to give you $250,000 for a one-day event? You don't have a family to support, my mother pointed out. And you've always been the responsible one with money. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, my father added. But this is about family, Megan. Brooke would do the same for you. I nearly laughed at that. Brooke had never done anything for me. Would she? I asked. Would you? I looked directly at my parents. When I needed help for college, something that would impact my entire future, you told me you had nothing to give. Now you want me to hand over $250,000 for a party. That was different, my mother said dismissively. You were always going to be fine. You had scholarships. I worked 3 jobs. My composure finally cracked. I was exhausted all the time. I nearly lost my scholarship because I was so tired I could barely study. I lived on whatever food I could take home from the restaurant while you paid for Brooke's apartment and spending money. You're still bitter about that? Brooke rolled her eyes. God, Megan, that was years ago. Get over it. Get over it? I repeated incredulously. I'm still paying off student loans while you got a fully funded education and semester abroad in Paris. And now you want $250,000 from me for your wedding. You owe me this, Brooke said, her voice hardening. You've been distant and judgmental for years. This is your chance to be a real sister for once. That was the breaking point. Years of suppressed anger and hurt came flooding out. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You've been given everything while I've had to fight for scraps. And now that I've built something for myself, you want to take that too? No. Absolutely not. Megan, my father's voice took on the authoritative tone he'd used when I was a child. Family helps family. That's what we do. Since when? I asked. When have any of you helped me? When have you even shown interest in my life? This is the first time you've visited my home. You didn't come to my college graduation. You barely acknowledged my professional achievements. And now you show up expecting me to hand over my savings for Brooke's wedding? That's not family. That's exploitation. The room fell silent. My mother's face had gone pale, my father looked thunderous, and Brooke was on the verge of tears. I think it's time for you all to leave, I said, standing up. I won't be funding the wedding. Not with $250,000, not with any amount. If that's how you feel, my father said stiffly, rising to his feet, then maybe we don't need to stay in contact going forward. That's your choice, I replied, surprising myself with my calmness. but I won't be emotionally or financially blackmailed. Brooke stood and grabbed her designer purse. I always knew you were selfish, she spat. Congratulations on your perfect little life that you built all by yourself, because you're so smart and special. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you have no family left. They left without another word, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed through my quiet condo. I stood there, shaking with adrenaline, feeling both liberated and devastated. For the first time, I had stood up to them, refused to accept the role they'd always cast me in. But I was now alone in a way I hadn't been before. This wasn't the distance I'd carefully maintained over the years. This was a chasm that might never be bridged. The aftermath of that confrontation was like the calm after a bomb detonation, eerily quiet, but with devastation all around. For 2 days, there was complete silence from my family. I vacillated between relief that I'd finally stood my ground and gnawing guilt that perhaps I'd been too harsh. On the 3rd day, the pressure campaign began. It started with a series of text messages from my mother. We're very disappointed in your attitude. Family should come before money. Your sister is heartbroken. Then came my father's voicemails, his tone shifting from stern disapproval to attempted reason. Let's talk about this like adults, Megan. We can discuss a different amount if that's the issue. Don't throw away your family over money. Brooke's approach was more direct. She posted a thinly veiled rant on social media. Some people claim to be family but disappear when you actually need them. Then they wonder why they're alone. I didn't respond to any of it, needing time to process my feelings and determine my boundaries going forward. Then the extended family got involved. My mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, called first. Megan, honey, what's this I hear about you refusing to help with Brooke's wedding? Your mother is beside herself. It's a private matter between me and my immediate family, I replied, unwilling to rehash the entire history. Well, family helps family, she parroted my father's words. When my daughter got married, everyone pitched in. Did anyone pitch in $250,000? I asked. Well, no, but that's what Brooke needs for her special day. You've always been the successful one. This is your chance to share that success. Similar calls followed from other relatives, all of them working from the same script. I was selfish. Family comes first. Brooke deserves her dream wedding. None of them seemed aware of, or concerned with, the history of inequity that led to this point. The pressure intensified when my mother sent a group email to the entire extended family explaining that the wedding might have to be drastically downsized because of my refusal to help despite my financial means. The email included details of my lucrative tech job and implied I was hoarding wealth while my sister suffered. The response was a barrage of messages from cousins, aunts, and uncles I barely spoke to, all expressing disappointment in my selfishness. Amid this storm, I turned to my support system. Rachel, still my closest friend years after college, was outraged on my behalf. They didn't contribute a dime to your education, and now they want $250,000 for a wedding? That's insane, she fumed during our video call. And the fact that they're rallying the family against you is manipulative and toxic. My therapist helped me process the complex emotions. You're experiencing guilt because you've been conditioned to put everyone else's needs before your own. But saying no to an unreasonable request isn't selfish, it's healthy boundary setting. Diane, my mentor, shared her own experience. My brother expected me to fund his business ventures after I became successful. When I refused the 3rd time, my parents said I was turning my back on family. It took years, but they eventually respected my boundaries. Stay strong, Megan. Out of curiosity, I consulted with my financial advisor about what $250,000 would mean for my future security. That sum represents years of disciplined saving, he explained, showing me projections. Taking that amount out now would significantly impact your retirement timeline and other financial goals like buying a larger home or starting your own business someday. Seeing the numbers in black and white reinforced my decision. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle and my future security. After 2 weeks of constant pressure, I decided to offer a compromise. I called my parents and proposed contributing $10,000 to the wedding, a generous gift by normal standards. with the condition that the constant messages and family pressure campaigns stop immediately. 10,000, my mother repeated incredulously. That's insulting. The flowers alone cost more than that. Then I suggest Brooke choose less expensive flowers, I replied. $10,000 is my final offer. My father got on the line. This isn't about the money anymore, Megan. It's about your attitude. Your sister deserves better from you. The call ended with my offer rejected and relations more strained than ever. The most surprising development came a week later when I received a text from an unknown number. This is James, Brooke's fiancé. Can we meet for coffee? Just the two of us. Curious, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near my office. James was well-dressed and polite, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I wanted to understand what's happening with the wedding funding, he began after awkward introductions. Brooke is devastated, and her parents are talking about remortgaging their house. Remortgaging their house? I repeated, shocked. For a wedding? They said it's necessary since you refuse to help, he explained. Is that true? That you won't help at all. I gave him a condensed version of my history with my family, including their refusal to help with my education while fully funding Brooke's. James listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Brooke never mentioned any of this, he said finally. She told me you've always been jealous of her, and that's why you won't help. That's not surprising, I replied. We have very different perspectives on our childhood. He hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. Brooke has significant credit card debt. I only found out recently. She says it's normal to carry balances, but we're talking about over $50,000. This revelation didn't surprise me, but I appreciated his honesty. Financial compatibility is important in a marriage, I said carefully. These patterns tend to continue. James nodded thoughtfully. The wedding has already been downsized. We're doing it at my parents' country club now, with 100 guests. Much more reasonable. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. Will you come? He asked. Despite everything, I think it would mean a lot to have family there. I was touched by his attempt at reconciliation but knew better than to expect the same from Brooke. I don't think that would be comfortable for anyone involved, I replied. But I appreciate the invitation. As we parted ways, James thanked me for my honesty. It helps to understand the full picture, he said. I hope someday things can be better between all of you. I hoped so too, but I wasn't holding my breath. In the months following the wedding demand and subsequent family fallout, I experienced a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the family relationships I'd always hoped would improve, and relief from the constant underlying anxiety of trying to earn approval that never came. My therapist suggested writing a letter expressing my feelings, not necessarily to send but to clarify my own thoughts. I spent an entire weekend crafting this letter, pouring out decades of hurt, disappointment, and anger. I detailed specific instances of unfair treatment, acknowledged my own part in maintaining unhealthy dynamics by not speaking up sooner, and expressed what I needed from them if we were to have any relationship moving forward. After careful consideration, I decided to send it. Not because I expected them to suddenly understand or change, but because I needed to express my truth, regardless of how they received it. I'm not holding my breath for a response, I told Rachel after dropping the letter in the mail. But I needed to say these things for me, not for them. While waiting any potential fallout from my letter, I decided to invest in myself in a way I'd been postponing for years. With part of the savings that would have gone to Brooke's wedding, I enrolled in a part-time MBA program I'd been eyeing. It would enhance my career prospects while allowing me to continue working full-time. This is exactly what that money should be used for, Diane said when I told her about my decision. An investment in your future, not in someone else's one-day spectacle. I also created what I privately called a family emergency fund, money set aside specifically for genuine family crises that might arise in the future. It came with strict mental conditions. I would help in cases of medical emergencies, housing insecurity, or other true hardships, but not for lifestyle choices or luxury expenditures. This fund gave me peace of mind that I could be compassionate without being exploited. As I expected, No direct response to my letter came from my parents. Instead, after Brooke's downsized wedding, to which I wasn't invited, I received a terse text from my mother. Brooke and James are married now. It was a lovely ceremony despite the limitations. The passive-aggressive jab was clear, but it no longer had the power to wound me as it once would have. 3 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected call from James. He sounded stressed. "I hope it's okay to call you," he began. "Things have been difficult with Brooke since the wedding." "What's happening?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "The spending hasn't stopped," he explained. "I thought once the wedding was over, things would normalize, but she's still using credit cards for luxury purchases we can't afford. When I try to discuss budgeting, she gets defensive and says I'm trying to control her." I felt sympathy for him, but knew this wasn't my problem to solve. "Financial counseling might help," I suggested. "Or perhaps therapy to understand the emotional aspects of spending." "I've suggested both," he sighed. "She refuses. Says there's nothing wrong with living a little and that I knew who I was marrying." After offering what advice I could, I ended the call feeling a sad vindication. The patterns established in our childhood were playing out exactly as I'd expected. 6 months after the wedding confrontation, my parents reached out. Not with an apology, but with a problem. "Your father's company is downsizing," my mother explained during our stilted phone conversation. "He's being offered early retirement, but the package isn't what we hoped for. And with the house refinanced for Brooke's wedding, our monthly payments are higher now." I listened silently, already knowing where this was heading. "We might need to sell the house," she continued. "Unless—" "Well, we thought perhaps you could help with the mortgage for a while. Just until we get back on our feet." The old Megan would have immediately calculated how much she could spare, eager to prove her worth through financial support. The new Megan took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to hear about Dad's job situation," I said calmly. "That must be stressful. I've actually set aside a family emergency fund for situations like this, but I have some conditions." "Conditions?" My mother's voice cooled immediately. "Yes. I'm happy to help with 3 months of mortgage payments while Dad looks for a new job or adjusts to retirement. But I'll need to see your complete financial picture first, including all debts and expenses. And I'd like you both to meet with my financial advisor to create a sustainable budget moving forward." The silence on the other end was deafening. "That seems excessive," she finally replied. "We're not children who need supervision with money, Megan." "It's not supervision," I explained. "It's accountability. I'm offering help with clear boundaries. Take it or leave it." They left it. 2 weeks later, I learned through a relative that they'd decided to sell the house and downsize to a condo instead. The final significant conversation came nearly a year after the initial wedding demand. My parents called and asked to meet in person. Cautiously, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant halfway between our homes. To my surprise, my father began with something close to an acknowledgement. "We've had time to think about what happened last year, and about your letter. While we don't agree with everything you said, we can see that perhaps there were disparities in how we approached your and Brooke's needs growing up." My mother nodded reluctantly. "We always thought we were doing what was best for each of you based on your different personalities. You were so independent, Megan. We thought you preferred to handle things yourself." "I was independent because I had to be," I replied. I learned early that asking for help wouldn't get me anywhere. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, but didn't argue. "We're not here to rehash the past," my father continued, "but to see if there's a way forward. We miss having you in our lives." "I miss the idea of family," I admitted. "But I need you to understand that our relationship can only continue with clear boundaries and mutual respect. I won't be a financial resource without also being valued as a daughter." We didn't resolve everything in that one conversation. Decades of dysfunctional patterns can't be fixed over dinner. But it was a start, an acknowledgement that something had been wrong and needed to change. As I drove home that night, I realized I no longer needed their approval or understanding to feel complete. I had built a life I was proud of, surrounded myself with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Whether my biological family could adapt to the new boundaries remained to be seen, but either way, I would be okay. 1 year after the wedding demand that changed everything, my life had transformed in ways I never anticipated. My MBA program was challenging but rewarding, opening doors to new opportunities within my company. The therapy skills I developed helped me maintain healthy boundaries not just with family but in all relationships. My parents and I had established a tentative new dynamic. We spoke monthly on scheduled calls, keeping conversations light but genuine. They no longer asked for financial assistance, and I no longer felt the need to prove my worth through achievement. It wasn't the warm, close relationship I'd once longed for, but it was honest, and that counted for something. Brooke's fairy tale marriage had ended after just 9 months. The financial incompatibility James had worried about proved insurmountable, especially when combined with other underlying issues. She'd moved back into the condo with our parents, a situation that was reportedly tense for everyone involved. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon, reviewing notes for an upcoming presentation, when someone slid into the chair across from me. I looked up to find Brooke, looking less polished than I remembered, but somehow more authentic. "I didn't know if you'd talk to me if I called first," she said by way of greeting. I closed my laptop. "I guess we'll never know now." She smiled faintly at my dry response. "Fair enough. I won't take much of your time. I owe you an apology." Of all the things I expected her to say, that wasn't on the list. "James said he talked to you before the wedding," she continued when I didn't respond. "He told me what you said about our childhood. About college." I dismissed it then, told him you were exaggerating. "But after everything fell apart, I've been doing a lot of thinking." She fidgeted with a paper napkin, tearing small pieces off the corner. "When I moved back in with Mom and Dad, I started noticing things I never saw before. The way they expected me to be helpless, the way they stepped in to solve all my problems without letting me learn anything. It wasn't actually helpful, even though it felt good at the time." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "They put us in boxes. You were the pretty, social one who needed protecting. I was the smart, capable one who didn't need help. Neither was fair to who we really were." "Yeah," she agreed quietly. "Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For the wedding demand, for taking their side all these years, for not seeing what was happening. You didn't deserve any of that." The apology was imperfect but sincere, and I felt something tight inside me loosen slightly. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means a lot. I also wanted to ask." She hesitated. "How did you do it? Become so independent and successful?" "I feel like I'm starting from scratch at 26. Rather than giving her money, I offered something more valuable, knowledge." We spent the next 2 hours talking about basic financial literacy, budgeting, saving, responsible credit use. I recommended books and podcasts that had helped me and suggested resources for job hunting since she was looking for work. "I can't believe no one ever taught me this stuff," she said as our conversation wound down. "It seems so basic." "It is basic," I agreed. "But you can't know what you aren't taught." As she gathered her things to leave, she asked hesitantly, "Could we maybe do this again sometime? I could use a big sister right now." For the first time in our adult lives, she was seeing me as someone with value beyond my wallet. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. Looking back on my journey from desperate college student to the confident, financially secure woman I'd become, I realized how much I'd grown. The pain of family favoritism had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. My mentor Diane had recently celebrated her 70th birthday, and during the party, she'd pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," she'd said. "Not just for your career success, but for learning to value yourself when others didn't. That's the hardest lesson to learn." She was right. Building financial security had been challenging, but building self-worth had been the real battle. I now had plans to establish a small scholarship fund for students without family financial support. It wouldn't be much at first, just enough to help one student per year with books or living expenses, but it was a start. Maybe someday it would grow into something that could make a real difference for students like I had been. My chosen family. Friends like Rachel, mentors like Diane, colleagues who'd become confidants, had shown me what genuine support looked like. They celebrated my successes without expecting to benefit from them and offered help without keeping score. As for my biological family, I'd learned that forgiveness didn't mean allowing further exploitation. It meant releasing the anger that had once consumed me while still protecting my hard-earned boundaries. The greatest gift I'd given myself wasn't financial security, though that mattered. It was permission to put myself first after a lifetime of coming last. To recognize that I deserved the same care and investment I'd always been expected to give others. That lesson had been worth every difficult conversation and painful confrontation. Sometimes the most profound form of self-love is simply saying no to those who see you as a resource rather than a person. Sometimes the most important family is the one you build, not the one you're born into. And sometimes the greatest wealth isn't in your bank account, but in knowing your own worth, independent of what anyone else believes. If you've ever struggled with family expectations or financial boundaries, I hope my story resonates with you. Have you ever had to say no to unreasonable family demands? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story helped you feel less alone in your struggles, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more authentic conversations about family dynamics and financial independence. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for your well-being. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage in creating your own path to fulfillment and peace.